He came to steal a recipe. He stayed to save a city. Mark arrived while the city was still half dead. The streetlights hadn't turned off yet, glowing weakly against the pale gray of early morning. The asphalt was damp, holding onto the night, and the air smelled of cold metal and old rain. No cars, no people, just the quiet hum of a city that didn't yet know it would soon wake up hungry. The bakery stood apart from everything around it. It wasn't inviting. It didn't try to be. Thick brick walls, darkened by decades of heat and smoke. Windows permanently fogged from the inside, as if the building was breathing and didn't care who was watching. The wooden sign above the door was worn smooth at the edges, the name barely legible, touched by thousands of hands over 100 years. Mark stopped in front of it. He checked his reflection in the glass without thinking. Clean jacket, neutral colors, nothing that screamed corporate, nothing that looked too cheap either. In the inner seam of his jacket, stitched carefully and invisibly, the micro camera was already warm against his ribs. Active, recording in short encrypted bursts. 7 days. The voice from last night echoed in his head. We don't need her bakery. We need the culture, the starter, the process. The rest is noise. Mark exhaled slowly and pushed the door open. The bakery's breath hit him immediately, a thick, fermented humidity that felt less like air and more like a physical weight. It was aggressive and sour, crawling into his lungs and staying there. The door closed behind him with a dull thud. Inside, the bakery was already awake. Metal scraped against metal. Dough slapped hard against wood. Somewhere, an old industrial mixer growled, uneven, as if it might stop at any second out of spite. Yellow lamps hung low from the ceiling, throwing pools of light onto long wooden tables scarred by knives, heat, and time. No music, no screens, no digital clocks, just work. Lock the door. The voice came from his left. Mark turned. Eliza stood near the main table, arms crossed, weight shifted onto one hip. Flour dusted her forearms, clinging to her skin in pale streaks. Her hair was pulled back without care, a few loose strands already damp with sweat. She wore a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up and an apron that had clearly lived through more mornings like this than he could count. Her eyes moved over him slowly. Shoes, posture, hands. She took her time. You're early, Mark said, offering a polite, professional half-smile. I'm Mark, the trainee technologist from. I know who you are, she interrupted. No hostility, no warmth either. Just fact. She nodded once toward the door. Lock it. If you're in, you're in. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then did as told. The click of the lock sounded louder than it should have. Eliza turned away immediately, already losing interest. You're late. Mark glanced at his watch out of habit. It's 4:42. We start at 4, she replied without looking back. Strike one. He followed her deeper into the bakery. The floor was worn smooth, slightly sticky beneath his shoes. Along the walls, massive sacks of flour were stacked like fortifications. No labels, no brands, just rough fabric and handwritten chalk marks. He scanned automatically, mentally mapping the space. Camera angle, lines of sight, possible blind spots. Nothing here was designed to be observed comfortably. Apron. She tossed it at him without warning. He caught it awkwardly. The smell hit him again, sour, warm, unmistakably alive. He tied it around his waist, fingers already clumsier than usual from the heat. So, he said, keeping his tone neutral, cooperative. Where do you keep your measurements? I didn't see any scales. Eliza paused. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked at him as if he'd asked something faintly obscene. Measurements, she repeated. Yes. Ratios. Hydration levels. Fermentation timing. A corner of her mouth lifted, not a smile. Something sharper. You don't measure something that breathes, she said. You feel it. She pointed toward the wall. Start there. Mark followed her gesture. The flour bags. They were bigger than he'd expected. Move them closer to the mixer, she added. All of them. How many, he asked. She shrugged. Enough. He crouched and grabbed the first sack. The weight shocked him. The bag sagged instantly, pulling his arms down, forcing him to readjust. He lifted again, teeth clenching as the mass of it dragged against his body. His shoulder protested immediately. He took one step, then another. Flour puffed into the air with each movement, coating his shoes, his pants, his lungs. He coughed, Tried to hide it, failed. Behind him, Eliza went back to work. Hands into dough. Fold. Turn. Press. Pause. Again. No wasted movement. No hesitation. By the third bag, his back was on fire. By the fifth, sweat soaked through his shirt and glued the camera uncomfortably against his skin. The technology felt heavier now, not physically, but morally, like it didn't belong here. No dropping, Eliza said calmly, without looking at him. If it spills, you clean it. Mark grunted and adjusted his grip. So you really don't write anything down? He asked, breath rough. No logs? No documentation. She pressed 2 fingers into the dough, held them there, then released. The indentation filled slowly, obediently. That's documentation, she said. He washed her hands despite himself. The way she listened with her fingertips. The way her body leaned in, as if the dough might answer back. There was nothing he could photograph that would explain it. The realization irritated him more than the pain. His grip slipped on the next bag. Flour spilled across the floor, a white wound against the dark tiles. Eliza sighed. Not angry. Tired. City boy, she muttered. You think knowledge lives on paper. She stepped closer now, close enough that he felt her heat through the air. This place eats people like you, she said quietly. If you last the week, I'll be surprised. She turned back to her table. Mark straightened slowly, muscles trembling, lungs burning, jaw tight. The camera kept recording. The mission had officially begun. And already, the bakery was telling him something very clear. This wasn't a place that could be stolen from easily. By the second morning, Mark's body had stopped pretending it was fine. He woke before the alarm, muscles already aching, shoulders stiff as if someone had poured concrete into his joints overnight. His hands throbbed dully, the skin along his palms roughened and red, tiny cracks beginning to form where flour and water had dried him out faster than he expected. The bakery was already alive when he arrived. The same heat, the same smell, yeast, sourness, something metallic from the ovens warming up. The same heavy silence, broken only by work. Eliza didn't look up when he came in. Apron, she said. He tied it on without a word. She nodded toward the back. Dishes first. The tubs from last night. Mark followed her gaze and froze. Metal mixing bowls the size of small bathtubs were stacked against the wall, crusted with dried dough, residue clinging to the sides like hardened clay. There were no machines nearby, just a hose, brushes, and a drain in the floor. You're joking, he said before he could stop himself. Eliza finally turned. One eyebrow lifted. You want to bake or talk? He swallowed whatever he was about to say and rolled up his sleeves. The water was scalding. Steam rose immediately as he sprayed the first tub, fogging his glasses and coating his face in damp heat. He scrubbed hard, the brush biting into his palms. Dough resisted, stubborn and elastic even in death. By the third tub, his arms were shaking. Eliza passed behind him carrying a tray of shaped loaves. Use your weight, she said. Not your wrists. I'm fine, Mark muttered. She stopped, turned, took the brush from his hands without asking and demonstrated. Leaning into the tub, shoulder engaged, movement efficient. The dough came off in thick strips. Science won't replace muscle, she said flatly. Not here. She handed the brush back. Mark said nothing. His jaw clenched, not from anger, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being genuinely bad at something. Hours blurred together. Lift, scrub, rinse, carry, repeat. Flour coated everything. His hair, his eyebrows, the inside of his mouth. Sweat ran down his spine constantly, never cooling. The camera lens had to be wiped twice when it fogged. At one point, he bent to lift another tub and felt his lower back spasm sharply. He sucked in a breath through his teeth and froze. Eliza noticed. Not immediately. She wasn't watching him. She noticed because the rhythm broke. Don't jerk it, she said. You'll tear something. I'm good, he lied. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time there was no mockery in her eyes. Just calculation. Take 30 seconds, she said. Then keep going. It wasn't kindness. It was practicality. Later, she put him on dough. Hands, she said, nodding toward a massive mound resting on the table. No gloves. He hesitated. I should wash. Flour sterilizes better than soap, she replied. Touch it. He did. The dough was warm. Shockingly so. Alive beneath his fingers, stretching, resisting, yielding. It stuck to his skin immediately, clinging to every line of his palm. He flinched instinctively. Eliza smirked. Relax. It knows when you're scared. That's not how bacteria works. That's how bread works. She demonstrated again, folding, pressing, turning with her whole body. Mark mimicked her, awkward, too stiff, too careful. The dough fought him, tearing instead of stretching. You're strangling it, she said. You don't control it. You cooperate. He tried again. Slower. Less force. The dough responded differently. Something in his chest tightened, not frustration this time, but reluctant interest. By late afternoon, his arms were numb. His shirt was soaked through. His hands shook when he tried to drink water. Eliza leaned against the table, watching him with open amusement now. You still think you're here to steal something? She asked. He looked up. I'm here to learn. It wasn't entirely a lie. She held his gaze for a long moment, then snorted. We'll see how long that lasts. As the ovens roared to life and the first loaves went in, Mark felt it clearly for the first time. The bakery wasn't just resisting him. It was reshaping him. The night shift began at 2 a.m. Not symbolically. Not around 2. Exactly. Mark learned this when the door slammed shut behind him and Eliza locked it without a word. The click echoed through the bakery like a final decision. Outside, the city had gone dark again. Inside, the lamps burned low and yellow, throwing long shadows across the wooden tables. The ovens exhaled heat in slow, rhythmic warnings, and the air was thick, humid, heavy with fermentation and sleep deprivation. This was a different bakery. Quieter, more intimate, less forgiving. Eliza moved first, tying her apron tighter, rolling her shoulders once as if preparing for a fight. Mark watched without meaning to. In the dim light, her movements were slower, more deliberate. Nothing wasted. Nothing rushed. Night rules are simple, she said. You mess up, we don't fix it tomorrow. We throw it away. Mark nodded. His body was already protesting. Muscles sore from the day before, hands tender where the skin had begun to split. The heat made everything worse, pressing down on him like a hand on the back of his neck. They worked in silence at first, mixing, dividing, resting. The rhythm was different now. Fewer words, more listening. The dough breathed between their hands, rising and relaxing, responding to temperature, pressure, patience. Mark tried to keep track of times in his head. Failed. There were no clocks he could see. Eliza worked by instinct, by smell, by touch. When he hesitated, she corrected him with a gesture or a quiet command. Wait. Now. Again. At one point, they stood on opposite sides of the table shaping baguettes. Long, narrow pieces of dough rested between them like pale bodies. Watch, Eliza said. She demonstrated slowly, rolling the dough under her palms, coaxing it into length rather than forcing it. Mark mirrored her movements, clumsy but trying. Too stiff, she said. You're thinking again. I need to be precise. She snorted. Precision kills bread. She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel her heat through the air, the faint brush of her sleeve against his arm as she leaned in. Without asking, she reached out and adjusted his hands. Like this. Her fingers were warm, dusty with flour, confident. She guided his palms, slowing them, pressing where he pressed too hard, easing off where he overcorrected. Their hands moved together now, synchronized, shaping the dough in one continuous motion. Mark's breath hitched before he could stop it. Their fingers brushed again, then again, accidentally, repeatedly. The dough released a soft hiss as air escaped. Steam rose faintly from the table, blurring the space between them. Eliza didn't pull away. Don't rush it, she murmured. Feel the tension. It'll tell you when it's ready. Her voice was lower at night. Closer. The words landed somewhere under his skin instead of in his ears. Mark swallowed. The micro camera pressed against his ribs, suddenly intrusive, foreign. He was acutely aware of his hands, of her hands, of the narrow distance between their bodies. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Eliza stepped back, just as deliberately as she had stepped in. Good, she said. Do the rest. They worked like that for hours. No music, no talking, just the soft slap of dough, the hum of ovens, the quiet choreography of two bodies learning the same rhythm. Mark lost track of time completely. When the first batch went into the oven, Eliza stood beside him, watching through the glass. Their shoulders touched, barely, but neither moved away. Bread remembers, she said suddenly. How you treated it. He looked at her. You really believe that? She met his gaze, eyes steady in the low light. I know it. The oven light flickered. Heat washed over them. Something had shifted. Not trust. Not yet. But the space between them had changed, filled now with warmth, shared exhaustion, and a tension that had nothing to do with dough. And Mark knew, with uncomfortable clarity, that the mission had just become more dangerous. Not because of what he might steal, but because of what he was starting to feel. The bakery didn't sleep. It only changed tempo. By the fourth night, Mark had learned the rhythms well enough to predict when Eliza would step away, when the ovens demanded attention, when the dough could be left alone without punishment. His body moved on autopilot now, shoulders still aching, hands raw but tougher, skin permanently dusted with flour no matter how often he washed. And the camera kept recording. Every night, when he lay on the narrow cot in the back room, he told himself the same thing. You're here to do a job. Every morning, when Eliza brushed past him without apology, that certainty thinned. Tonight, the bakery felt especially quiet. The lamps were dimmer. The city outside was sealed behind locked doors and thick walls. The only sounds were breath, heat, and the slow, wet movement of dough. Eliza kneaded at the main table, sleeves rolled up, hair loose from its tie. She worked without looking at him, trusting him now with smaller tasks, dividing dough, shaping, carrying trays to rest. Trust built on repetition, on reliability. Mark waited. He'd mapped this moment carefully. The starter, rested in its usual place. A heavy ceramic crock tucked into a corner near the proofing racks. Always covered, always warm, always alive. He watched the way Eliza handled it earlier, gentle, almost reverent. She fed it, stirred, returned it to its place like something that might resent roughness. He'd never seen her weigh it, only feel. When she finally turned away, moving toward the ovens with a tray of loaves, Mark felt his pulse spike. Now, he crossed the space quietly, heart hammering loud enough he was sure she could hear it. From his pocket, he slid out the slim metal case, opening it just enough to reveal a sterile vial and a disposable pipette. Fast, clean, no trace. He lifted the lid of the crock. The stench of the starter was sharp and vinegary, a complex rot that felt dangerously alive. It bubbled faintly, reacting to the cool air like a cornered animal. Just a sample, he told himself. He dipped the pipette carefully, extracting a small amount, sealing it into the vial with practiced precision. His hands were steady. His breathing was not. He was closing the case when he sensed movement. Not sound. Presence. He froze. Eliza stood at the edge of the room. She wasn't in her apron anymore. She wore only a long, pale shirt, oversized, soft, falling mid-thigh. Bare legs. Bare feet on the warm tiles. Her hair hung loose over her shoulders, dark and slightly damp, as if she'd just washed it or simply given up tying it back. "What are you doing?" she asked. Her voice wasn't sharp. It was tired, curious. Mark snapped the case shut and slid it back into his pocket in one smooth motion, turning toward her with what he hoped passed for calm. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "I thought the dough needed checking." She looked past him, at the crock, at the lid. For a long, stretched second, Mark was certain she knew. Then she stepped closer, close enough that the heat between them rose instantly, thick and undeniable. "The dough sleeps," she said quietly. "People don't." She reached past him and adjusted the lid on the starter, her fingers brushing his wrist in the process. The contact was brief. Electric. His pulse jumped traitorously. Her gaze lifted to his face. "You're restless," she said. "City never taught you how to be still." He swallowed. Maybe. They stood there, too close, breathing the same air. The vial in his pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. Eliza's eyes dropped, just for a second, to his hands. The cracked skin, the redness, the faint tremor he couldn't fully control. "You should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's longer." She turned away without another word and disappeared into the back room. Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He stood there for another full minute before he dared to move. The sample was secured. The mission had advanced. And yet, as he returned the starter fully to its place and wiped his hands on his apron, a different realization settled in his chest. Slow, heavy, inescapable. Stealing the culture had been easy. Hiding what he was becoming would not be. By the second week, Eliza stopped correcting Mark with words. She corrected him with proximity. The bakery had shifted again, less hostile now, but more demanding. The work was harder, the standards sharper. Mark noticed it in the way she watched him, in the tasks she gave him without explanation, expecting him to understand by feel alone. "You're too tense," she said one morning, pushing a bowl of dough toward him. "Bread feels that." "I'm just trying not to ruin it," he replied. "That's exactly the problem." She motioned him to the table. "Hands." He placed them on the dough. It was warmer than his skin now, elastic, breathing under his palms. "Close your eyes." He hesitated. "I need to see." "Close them." He did. Immediately, the world narrowed. Sound. Heat. Pressure. "Now press," Eliza said. He did, carefully, uncertain. "Not like you're afraid of it," she said. "Like you're listening." He adjusted, pressing more evenly, letting the dough respond instead of forcing it. "Better," she murmured. Then she stepped behind him, so close that his back brushed her front. Her breath warmed the side of his neck. Without asking, she placed her hands over his, larger palms guiding his smaller, firmer ones. "Feel this," she said quietly. Her fingers curled around his, directing the movement. Slow, deliberate, intimate. Mark's pulse spiked. Every nerve in his hands seemed suddenly overexposed. The dough stretched smoothly now, compliant, alive. "Don't think," she whispered. "Let it tell you." Her thumbs pressed down, showing him exactly where the resistance changed, where the dough wanted to rest. Flour dusted both their hands, clinging to skin, filling the air with a faint white haze. This was the joke she'd warned him about without naming it. The joke that wasn't funny. Their bodies moved together in perfect synchronization. Press, fold, turn, her chest almost brushing his back, her hands never leaving his. The heat between them wasn't just from the ovens anymore. Mark exhaled slowly, trying to ground himself. "Eliza," he said, voice lower than he intended. "I think I get it." She didn't pull away immediately. "Good," she said, "because if you don't, everything else is useless." Her hands lingered a second longer, then slipped away. The absence felt louder than the contact. She moved around to face him, leaning against the table. Her eyes searched his, not suspicious, but curious, evaluating. "You're learning," she said. "Not the way you expected." He met her gaze. "No." A small smile flickered across her face, gone almost instantly. They worked the rest of the day like that, closer, quieter, charged. No more jokes about city boys. No mockery. Just shared focus, shared exhaustion. That night, when the ovens roared and the bakery filled with the smell of baking bread, Mark realized something he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. He no longer wanted to steal the starter. He wanted to understand it. And understanding, he was beginning to learn, required far more than a sample and a vial. The news broke just after midnight. It came through Mark's phone first, not as an alert, but as a message buried inside a corporate thread he wasn't supposed to check outside work hours. Line C, 7 contamination. Preservative system down. Full batch lost. Estimated recovery, 72 hours. Mark froze, the glow of the screen harsh against the darkened bakery. 72 hours. That meant empty shelves. That meant panic buying. That meant the city waking up to the idea that bread, something everyone assumed would always be there, might suddenly disappear. Behind him, the ovens hummed steadily, indifferent. Dough rested in rows, swelling under linen cloths like slow, sleeping animals. "Eliza," he said. She looked up from scoring loaves, blade flashing in her hand. "What?" He hesitated. This wasn't part of his assignment. This wasn't theft or data or formulas. This was real. "The factory," he said carefully. "The big one on the east side." Her jaw tightened instantly. "What about it?" "They lost a batch. Something with preservatives. The whole line's down." She didn't answer right away. She finished the cut she was making, precise and controlled, then set the blade aside. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough that they won't recover before the weekend." Silence settled between them, thick as flour dust. "That factory supplies half the city," she said finally. "I know." Eliza leaned against the table, crossing her arms. Mark could see the calculation already happening behind her eyes. Not fear, not panic, but logistics. Capacity. Time. Limits. "They'll try to import frozen loaves," she said. "Or push out chemical trash and call it bread." Mark swallowed. "Or they'll buy you." Her eyes snapped to his. "What?" "The corporation," he said. "They'll come knocking. Emergency contracts. Temporary takeovers. They'll want your starter." The word hung there, dangerous. Eliza stared at him, studying his face as if seeing him from a new angle. You sound very sure of that. He forced himself not to look away. That's how they work. She exhaled sharply through her nose. Figures. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The bakery clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second another reminder that time was already slipping. Then Eliza straightened. We can take orders, she said. Mark blinked. We? She walked toward the chalkboard where tomorrow's numbers were written. She wiped them clean with one decisive swipe. All of them, she continued. Hospitals, shelters, small shops, anyone the factory can't cover. That's impossible, Mark said automatically. You don't have the capacity. She turned to face him. I didn't say it would be easy. He ran a hand through his hair. Eliza, that's 48 hours minimum. No sleep. No margin for error. I know. You'd burn out the ovens. I've rebuilt them before. You'd ruin the starter. Her voice dropped. No, I wouldn't. There it was. The line she wouldn't cross. Mark felt something shift inside him. Not desire this time, but respect mixed with dread. You'd need help, he said quietly. She looked at him for a long second. Then, you still here? Yes. You still willing to work? Yes. Then stop talking. She handed him a marker. Right. He stepped up to the board, heart pounding, as she called out numbers, quantities that made his stomach tighten. Flour inventory, water ratios, oven rotations, proofing windows stacked so tight they bordered on madness. This wasn't a romantic challenge. This was a siege. By dawn, the bakery was alive in a way it hadn't been before. Every surface was occupied. Every tray mattered. The air in the room became a suffocating soup of steam and yeast. Sweat turned the white dust on his forearms into a sticky paste, gluing his shirt to his spine until every movement felt like tearing skin. They moved like parts of the same machine, passing trays without looking, adjusting timings instinctively. Eliza's voice cut through the noise, sharp but never panicked. Mark followed, learned, adapted. Somewhere between the 15th and 16th hour, exhaustion began to blur the edges of everything. Mark leaned against a wall, chest heaving. You're insane, he muttered. Eliza smiled faintly. You're still standing. Outside, the city slept, unaware that its weekend bread was being fought for in this small, overheated room. And somewhere across town, a corporation was already preparing to move. Mark knew that when they did, he would be standing in the middle, no longer sure which side he was on. But for now, there was dough to shape. And time was the enemy. By the second night, time stopped behaving normally. Hours folded into each other, marked only by the cycle of loading and unloading ovens, by the way the dough changed under their hands. Mark no longer trusted his internal clock. Only Eliza's voice and the rising heat told him when something was ready. They had been awake for almost 30 hours. Eliza moved more slowly now, not weaker, just economical. No wasted steps. No wasted words. Her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth darkened by sweat and flour. There was a faint burn on her forearm she hadn't acknowledged once. Mark's hands were no longer just sore. The skin on his knuckles had split, weeping thin lines of red that mixed with the white flour until his grip became slick and painful. His vision swam. Every time he leaned over the table, his lower back seized in a jagged spasm that forced him to lock his jaw to keep from crying out. He had reached the point where his mind was no longer in his body. He was just a machine of bone and muscle, fueled by caffeine and the desperate need not to fail in front of her. His backpack, hidden behind the rice sacks, felt like a lead weight, a reminder of a life that now felt as hollow as a burnt loaf. He told himself he would destroy them after this shift, after the next batch, after the city was fed. The moment came quietly. Eliza went to rest her eyes. 10 minutes, she said, on the narrow bench in the storage room. Mark nodded, though he doubted she'd actually sleep. She never really did when dough was rising. Alone, he kept working, hands moving automatically, body sore beyond complaint. That was when he heard it. A soft rustle. Not footsteps. Fabric. Eliza, he called. No answer. He wiped his hands and stepped toward the storage room. The light inside was on. The door was half open. She wasn't on the bench. She was standing by the work table. By his bag. Mark stopped. Eliza held one of the reports in her hands. She hadn't unfolded it fully. She didn't need to. The logo was enough. The precise, printed language beneath it confirmed everything. Her face was unreadable. For a second, Mark considered lying. The words lined up easily in his head: consultant, quality assurance, harmless research, but they died before reaching his mouth. He saw the way her fingers tightened on the paper. He knew lies would insult her more than the truth. "I was going to tell you," he said instead. She looked up slowly. "Don't," she replied. The single word cut deeper than shouting would have. She set the paper down carefully, as if it might contaminate the flour-covered table, then reached into the bag and pulled out the vial. She held it up between them. "How long?" she asked. Mark swallowed. "From the beginning." A silence fell so heavy it seemed to press against his ears. "You came here," she said evenly, "to steal from me." "Yes." "To take 100 years of work," she continued, voice calm in a way that frightened him, "and hand it to people who would dilute it, freeze it, sell it in plastic." "Yes." She nodded once, absorbing the truth. "And all this?" She gestured at the ovens, the trays, the endless work surrounding them. Was this also part of the plan? No. That was the fastest answer he'd given all night. She studied his face now, really looking at him, searching for calculation, for performance. She didn't set the vial down. She unscrewed the cap and poured the starter sample, his stolen prize, directly onto the floor at his feet. "You wanted to measure it?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage far colder than any storm. "There it is. Go on, scrape it up. Document how it dies on the tile." She shoved the corporate report into the open flame of the oven, watching the edges curl. "You didn't just lie, Mark. You tried to turn a living soul into a spreadsheet. Now finish the rack. You don't get to leave until the city's bread is safe. Work until your hands bleed, then get out." The ovens beeped behind them, demanding attention. The bakery didn't care about betrayal. Bread didn't wait for emotional resolution. Eliza turned away from him. "Finish this batch," she said. "Then leave." "Eliza." "Finish. Then go." Her voice was cold now, stripped of everything human. Mark did as she said. He worked mechanically, hands numb, chest tight. Every movement felt heavier than before. When the final loaves were cooling, dawn beginning to pale the windows, he washed his hands slowly. He packed his bag without the vial, without the papers. They stayed on the table. At the door, he stopped. "I won't take it," he said. She didn't turn around. "That doesn't undo what you did." "I know." He opened the door. The cold morning air hit his face like punishment. Behind him, Eliza spoke once more. "If you ever come back," she said, "it won't be as a spy." He stepped outside before she could say anything else. The door closed. Inside the bakery, Eliza stood alone among the cooling bread, staring at the starter jar as if it were something newly fragile. And across the city, the corporation prepared its next move, certain that Mark was still theirs. They were wrong, but Eliza didn't know that yet. The factory smelled wrong. Mark noticed it the moment he stepped inside. Not bad, just sterile, bleached. A faint chemical sharpness that clung to the air and coated the back of his throat. Nothing here breathed. Nothing fermented. Everything was sealed, regulated, neutralized. Perfect for killing something alive. He showed his badge at the security gate without hesitation. The guard barely glanced at it. Corporate access still worked. For now. Inside, conveyor belts hummed like obedient insects. Stainless steel tanks reflected fluorescent light. On one wall, a digital schedule flashed in clean blue letters. Weekend bread supply, emergency production. Mark followed the signs toward quality control. He already knew what he would find. In the central lab, a group of technicians stood around a long table. On it, containers labeled organic starter, trial replication. The contents inside were pale, sluggish. "Wrong." A man in a white coat noticed Mark. "You're late," he said. "We're about to stabilize the cultures." Mark leaned closer, pretending interest. Stabilize. That was the word they used when they meant kill. "What protocol?" Mark asked. The man shrugged. "Preservatives, enzyme inhibitors. We need consistency. The city can't afford romantic chemistry." Mark straightened slowly. "Who authorized this?" he asked. "Corporate," the man replied. "Same as the acquisition. Once the bakery signs, this becomes the master culture." Mark nodded, as if satisfied. Then he turned and walked straight into the executive corridor. No running. No panic. Anger, when sharpened enough, became precision. He found the acquisition room already active. Lawyers on screens, managers pacing, documents projected onto glass walls. The bakery's name appeared repeatedly, reduced to an asset code. A woman from legal frowned when she saw him. "Mark, we weren't expecting." "Good," he said. "Then you won't be prepared for this." He walked to the central terminal and plugged in his tablet. "Hey," someone started. Mark didn't look at them. His clearance still opened doors. His credentials still carried weight. That was the irony. Corporations trusted systems, not people. Files bloomed across the wall. Not Eliza's bakery. His reports. Field analysis. Sensory evaluations. Risk assessments. But halfway through each document, something changed. Annotations appeared. His handwriting converted to text. Starter viability dependent on manual process. Replication without original baker leads to failure. Cultural degradation observed after chemical stabilization. Product loses structural integrity within 72 hours. Murmurs rippled through the room. "This wasn't in the submitted reports," legal said sharply. "No," Mark replied. "These are the real ones." A manager scoffed. "You're contradicting yourself." "I'm correcting myself." He swiped again. Footage appeared. Short clips, grainy, unpolished. Dough being folded by hand. Steam rising in low light. Eliza's hands moving with instinct no algorithm could map. "This process cannot be patented," Mark said evenly. "It cannot be scaled. And it cannot survive without her." Silence. Then someone laughed nervously. "This is emotional nonsense." Mark turned to them. "You want numbers?" he said. "Fine." Another swipe. Projected graphs collapsed. Yield loss. Contamination risk. Public backlash estimates if the city's emergency bread failed. "And if you force this acquisition," he added, "you'll be liable for falsified reports." Legal went pale. "You're accusing the corporation of—" "I'm accusing myself," Mark said. "And I've already submitted everything to independent review." That part was a lie, but it would be true soon. Before he pulled out the paper reports, Mark entered a terminal command that overrode the master server. He didn't just delete the files. He corrupted the sensory mapping algorithms he'd spent weeks building. Without his specific calibration data, the laboratory samples were useless code. Only then did he drop the physical copies into the bin and light them, not to destroy evidence, but to sign his resignation and fire. Security arrived seconds later. As they escorted him out, Mark didn't resist. The factory doors closed behind him. Outside, the air felt different. Real. He pulled out his phone and typed one message, to an independent regulator, to a journalist, to anyone who would listen. Then he deleted every corporate contact he had. At dawn, as the city woke unaware of how close it had come to eating dead bread, Mark turned his car toward the bakery. He didn't rehearse apologies. He didn't prepare speeches. He only knew one thing now. If Eliza let him back in, it would be because of what he did next, not what he said. The sun hadn't fully risen, but the sky was already pale, streaked with orange and soft gray. Mark parked his car at the edge of town and walked the familiar cobbled street to the bakery. His legs ached from the factory raid, from adrenaline and lack of sleep. His hands, still rough and flour-stained, tingled with residual heat from the emergency burns on the papers. The bakery door was closed. Quiet. Unwelcoming. He knocked lightly. No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself. Then the door creaked open. Eliza stood there. Her arms were crossed. She hadn't even bothered to tie back her hair. Strands fell over her face. Her expression was calm, but unreadable. The faint morning light caught the flour dust lingering on her sleeves and apron, giving her the aura of someone who had survived the night without a single concession. "You're early," she said. "I've got no excuses," Mark said, voice low. "I came to help." She didn't respond immediately. She studied him. The redness on his palms. The small scars across his knuckles. The way his shirt clung to his chest, still faintly scented with flour. "You burned the reports?" she asked. "Yes," he said simply. She turned her gaze to the street, then back to him. "Do you know why I let you go?" Mark shook his head. "Because I wasn't sure if you'd choose the bread or the job," she said. Her voice was soft now, almost vulnerable. "I wasn't sure if you'd pick me, or yourself." He stepped inside. The smell hit him instantly. Warm ovens, yeast, and the faint tang of starter. He realized it was the first time he had ever truly breathed here without pretense, without pretending to be a student or a spy. "I pick the bread," he said. "I pick you. I pick all of it." Eliza raised an eyebrow, incredulous. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She didn't say anything. She just moved toward the large dough table and wiped it clean with a cloth. Mark followed, instinctively rolling up his sleeves again. His hands, already familiar with the dough, hovered over the first batch of the day. Without words, they began to work. Kneading, folding, pressing. Their movements were synchronized, not because of instruction, but because they had learned each other's rhythm. The warmth of the ovens rose around them. Steam curled like smoke around their hands, their arms occasionally brushing. Each accidental touch sent a spark up Mark's spine. He ignored it, focusing on the dough, letting it guide him. At last, the first loaves were ready for the oven. Mark pulled them onto trays, careful, precise. Eliza watched him for a moment, then nodded. He looked at her, and for the first time, there were no secrets left between them. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers for a second, his breath hitching. When he kissed her, it tasted of salt, dried flour, and exhaustion, a quiet, honest heat that had nothing to do with the ovens. Eliza smiled fully this time. "Don't get used to easy mornings," she said. "Thank you for listening to the story. Write your thoughts in the comments."